This is Green Street, the Environmental Health Show, greenstreetnews.org, Patti and Doug Wood, and our worldwide network of experts here every week to keep you tuned in to what's happening around the globe and what you may need to do to protect yourself and your family in this increasingly toxic world. Welcome back. Do you know what's causing the Earth's climate to change? Sure, burning fossil fuels and other activities of modern life are the macro factors, but what's actually happening under the hood, at the micro level, the molecular level? Today on Green Street, we're delighted to welcome our friend and climate scientist, Dr. Tyler Volk, who will help us understand what is actually going on, and you'll be able to amaze and impress your friends with your new knowledge. So stay tuned for that, but first, some of the news from the environmental health world. Patti, what do you got for us this week?
Really outrageous article entitled Making Citizen Science Illegal in Louisiana.
Oh boy.
Louisiana's Cancer Alley is notorious for its toxic air and alarmingly high cancer rates. The petrochemical hub between New Orleans and Baton Rouge is where oil, gas, and chemical corporations make their highly profitable products at the expense of the health of the local population. Even United Nations human rights experts have condemned the environmental racism driving the poisoning of Cancer Alley, whose residents are disproportionately poor, black, or both. Some people living near polluting facilities have started using pollution measuring equipment to monitor air quality in their own communities for themselves. It's an example of citizen science where the collection of scientific data is crowdsourced, but lawmakers in Louisiana are trying to prohibit this.
No.
Yeah. A law enacted in Louisiana requires that all air monitoring data that is shared publicly be collected by EPA-approved air monitoring equipment with a price tag of almost $800,000 each. Even worse, the law says that sharing data collected using any other equipment can be punished by fines of $32,500 a day, escalating to $1 million if the violation is done, quote, intentionally, willfully, or knowingly.
How else would you do citizen science except knowingly, willingly, and what was the other thing?
Yeah.
I mean, come on. These low-priced air monitors are reasonable for a community to get together and buy one.
And for them to understand what they and their children are being exposed to, or their farm animals,
yeah, I mean,
whatever.
They're a few $100s. They're not $800,000.
Exactly. Residents of the most polluted communities in Louisiana are fighting back in federal court.
Good.
Community groups are suing the state, alleging a violation of their First Amendment rights.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, you can't stop people from telling what's actually going on.
This is
especially
outrageous.
Those people.
Hey, you know, we're working with groups in Pennsylvania who are giving them air monitors. Purple air monitors, so that they can actually see when the worst air quality is, so that they can shut their windows, keep their children inside, not have a baseball game or a picnic on those days when the air quality is really bad. Come on.
That's terrible. What else you got? Anything good?
No, I'm afraid not. Not today.
All
but
right.
Anyway, there's a new study that shows chemical in Roundup, which is glyphosate, can cause cancer. Well, we know that.
Yeah,
I
thought that was old news.
This is new stuff.
Okay.
A new long-term animal study of the widely used weed killer glyphosate provides fresh evidence that the herbicide, introduced by Monsanto in the 1970s, causes multiple types of cancer and may do so at doses previously considered safe by regulators. Let me tell you the type of cancers that they have found.
Okay.
Skin cancer, liver cancer, thyroid cancer, central nervous system cancers, ovary cancer, mammary gland cancers, adrenal gland cancers, kidney cancers, bladder cancers, bone cancers, pancreatic cancers, uterine cancer, and spleen cancer.
Okay, what didn't they find? It's basically everything, isn't it? Holy cow.
The results of the 2-year study add to an ongoing global debate over the safety of the pesticide, which is commonly used by farmers to kill weeds in fields and pastures. The chemical is also used to manage weeds on golf courses, in parks and playgrounds, and in forestry management.
Why are they fighting this? I mean, you know, shouldn't they just pack up and go home? They need to stop making glyphosate, although it's the world's best-selling pesticide.
Well, and it's what they use for genetically modified crops. Although they're becoming...
Yeah, I thought they were becoming resistant.
They are becoming a little bit resistant, in some places.
Yeah.
So Germany-based Bayer which bought Monsanto in 2018. And boy, I'm
mistake.
sure that they are regretting that. And inherited the glyphosate-based Roundup brand, is currently embroiled in litigation in the United States brought by tens of thousands of people who allege that exposure to the company's glyphosate herbicides caused them to develop non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, a type of blood cancer. The company has already paid out billions of dollars in settlements and jury awards, and the new study comes as Bayer warns that if it cannot put an end to the litigation, it may shut down its glyphosate operations in the U.S. and possibly place its Monsanto businesses in bankruptcy.
Well, there you go.
Just as Monsanto always did, Bayer maintains that its glyphosate herbicides are not carcinogenic and says the weight of scientific research backs that position, even though the World Health Organization and their arm, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which is IARC, classifies glyphosate as a probable human carcinogen.
Yeah, which should be pretty soon upgraded to known carcinogen.
Yeah. But, there are other effects, too. Many studies have found a range of harmful effects from glyphosate exposure. A 2022 study, for example, found that glyphosate can have neurotoxic effects at doses lower than levels considered safe by regulatory agencies. And a 2023 study linked childhood exposure to glyphosate to liver inflammation and metabolic disorders.
As if cancer wasn't enough. Holy
No.
smoke. Interesting. All right. Thanks, Patti.
You're welcome. The Earth is getting warmer. It's no longer a subject of debate. It's here. And every single person in the world is beginning to witness firsthand the incredible consequences when the blanket of air that surrounds the Earth warms up even by 2 or 3 degrees, which is where we are right now. Storms are more severe, water levels are rising, ice sheets are melting, oceans are warming, migration patterns are shifting. The whole world is out of balance and struggling to come to terms with this new reality. And what's at the very root of this massive upheaval of our climate is something you can't see or smell or touch or feel. It's tiny, microscopic. It has to do with the way molecules behave. Our friend, Dr. Tyler Volk, is Professor Emeritus of Environmental Studies and Biology at New York University, where he researched and taught global climate change, biosphere theory, and the role of life in Earth dynamics. He's the author of many books, including CO2 Rising, which I highly recommend if you want to truly understand what the world is going through, as well as numerous YouTube videos about climate change. Doug and I had a chance to speak with Dr. Volk last week, and we began by talking about why it's important to understand the basic makeup and interactions of the biosphere. Here's our conversation with Dr. Tyler Volk.
I firmly believe that if people have some of the basic science in back of them, then these news items, they mean more, and it's less likely for people to be swayed into extreme positions one way or the other. For example, why is it that CO2, which is a tiny part of Earth's atmosphere compared to the big gases in the atmosphere in abundance, why is CO2 a greenhouse gas? Why is it affecting climate? Another question is water vapor. Water vapor is more abundant than CO2, and water vapor is a greenhouse gas itself. But people do not worry about water vapor. That's an interesting issue as well. But we do get into issues of imagining what a molecule is and what it's doing when it's in the atmosphere. So CO2, 3 atoms in it, 1 of carbon and 2 of oxygen. And it looks like the carbon's in the middle and the oxygen are like balls on either side. Think of 3 balls that are in a line. The middle one, let's say, is black for carbon, and the 2 of oxygen, have the word oxygen labeled on them. The biggest gases in the atmosphere in terms of abundance are oxygen gas, O2. Everyone mostly knows that. And nitrogen. Nitrogen is actually the most abundant, N2. And those 2 together are making up more than 99% of atmospheric gases. The CO2, carbon dioxide, is measured in parts per million. How many hundreds of parts per million is it? Which means if you grabbed a mass of the atmosphere and started randomly plucking out molecules in it, about 4/5 are going to be nitrogen, 1/5 are going to be oxygen, O2, and that adds up to 5/5, but it's not quite 5/5. Small amounts are these other gases, CO2, nitrous oxide, methane, which is even less than CO2 in the atmosphere. Ozone can be there as a city pollutant, but they're very small in amounts. What makes them the big problem? Well, it has to do with what CO2 and some of the other gases do to infrared radiation that is in the atmosphere. Well, there's infrared coming from your bodies, infrared coming from the walls. Anything that has Earth type temperature to it is radiating in the infrared. This is how infrared glasses work. They can see in the infrared. This is how a rattlesnake that has sensors in the infrared, pit vipers, it's the pits of these animals, have sensors in the infrared, and it allows them to see a mouse or another prey at night because the mouse is slightly warmer and gives off more infrared.
So it's a heat sensing.
It's a heat sensing.
Okay.
Heat sensing, yeah.
Yeah.
And what we say is heat. It's not. It's a different kind of sensing than you touching something warm. Your teacup. That's thermal sensors in your fingertips. It's not the infrared.
Right.
But it's different. But infrared is the heat sensor. So the Earth cools itself to space by infrared. The Earth is receiving sunlight, which is mostly what is called shortwave radiation. The Earth receives it, plants absorb it, the oceans absorb it, a little bit is absorbed by the atmosphere, but most is absorbed by land and the ocean and plants. And it's turned into other forms of energy. It's turned into chemical energy of the plants, but most of it's turned into warming up the Earth's surface, warming up the ocean, warming up the soil, and then these aspects of Earth's surface cool themselves by emitting into the infrared, and it doesn't just go directly into space. It gets absorbed in the atmosphere by molecules whose properties are such that they absorb infrared radiation. This is something interesting about CO2. It does not absorb the shortwave light from the sun, the light that reflects off of things that allows us to see with our eyes, the shortwave. This is shortwave radiation. That will just pass right through CO2 and the other greenhouse gases. But the infrared will get absorbed by them, and they act as blockades to the Earth cooling itself to space.
Okay, so let me just make sure I got this. So the Earth cools itself by emitting that infrared radiation outward.
Right. All directions, from everywhere.
The greenhouse gases are trapping it so it doesn't get out.
They're trapping it so, well, it does get out.
Okay.
But think of it as pushing against some resistance. So it is going to get out, but the Earth warms up to push it out more vigorously.
Okay.
It's very similar to insulation in your home. Let's say you have a furnace or something that's putting out heat at a certain rate, and you cannot turn it up. It's just a certain rate. And you're in a non-insulated habitat, and you're a little cold. You don't have enough insulation in your walls. So you put insulation in your walls, you reach a new temperature, a new steady temperature. You don't just keep heating up forever, but that temperature is higher than it was without the insulation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And this is sort of the story in a nutshell. To make it just a little bit more complex, the gases that are the greenhouse gases are distributed through the atmosphere. So these greenhouse gases will absorb the infrared right off the surface, and then it could be just a few feet or however, it doesn't have to be very high up, and then they'll re-radiate it. And so there's like a kind of a leapfrogging of this energy as it's making its way out of the Earth's atmosphere. But the basic thing is a wall, like multiple layers of insulation. The first layer is going to stop some heat, but the heat's going to get through. The second layer, and your abode is going to be warmer with the insulation than without the insulation. Now we cannot see this. This makes it a difficult pollutant to get a handle on, and we do not smell it. We do not have odor detectors. I've heard that creatures such as mosquitoes can somehow sense CO2 in your breath, and when you breathe out
Right.
outside, you can.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. They were selling something called a mosquito magnet, which was doing exactly that, and attracting the mosquitoes to this mosquito magnet just by releasing CO2.
When I go out to the garden in the summer when mosquitoes are out, I know this is probably stupid. I hold my breath and don't breathe out, so they can't find me as easily.
And
I put a fan on.
fan.
We actually
Yeah.
take a fan out to the garden, big box fan, and just
Yeah.
let it go full bore. And it keeps them away because they can't fly against the
So,
but it's
fan.
also getting rid of the bubble
That's
around
right.
you,
That's
yeah.
right.
which they
Works
home
like a
in
charm.
on.
Works like a
Now,
charm.
now there's something special. There's one more point I want to bring up, that these molecules that are the infrared absorbers and re-releasers, the so-called greenhouse gases, the family of greenhouse gases, they are all molecules that have 3 or more atoms in them. That's in contrast to the biggies in our atmosphere, O2 and N2, nitrogen and oxygen, that just have
Right.
2. And there's something special about having 3 or more atoms in the molecule. This gives the molecule an ability to do a kind of jitterbug in its vibratory modes, because molecules are chemical structures, but they're vibrating and they have vibratory modes. They are electronic little beings that are very hard to imagine. They are not the simple ball and stick figures that you might make as a model in chemistry class. They are little bits of electrical structures that are vibrating. And the reason it can absorb particular wavelengths of light have to do with resonance. It's somewhat like a tuning fork, or someone singing a note and maybe be able to vibrate a guitar string, or one guitar string being able to vibrate another. Doug, you probably
Sure.
have
Sympathetic vibration.
the sympathy between the natural vibratory modes of these greenhouse gases and the infrared energy fields of Earth's atmosphere. So we cannot see the gases, we cannot see the infrared, and yet I firmly believe, from teaching this material for a long time to people who are not science majors, that spending some time on this and getting it in the head correctly helps.
Mm-hmm.
So we're working on fertilizer legislation right now, and there's quite a bit of talk about nitrous oxide coming off fertilizer, which is also a greenhouse gas. Is that right? Could you just review what the greenhouse gases is and which are the most prevalent and the strongest ones? I mean, I understand that methane is more powerful than CO2. Is that correct?
What does that mean? It's more powerful.
Yeah, I don't know.
When I read that statement in the newspapers, I get very annoyed
Uh-oh. Didn't mean to annoy you.
because it's both true and false.
Okay.
And Doug,
I
you
hate
just,
science. I just want clean answers. Okay, go ahead.
okay, so methane is usually measured in parts per billion. CO2 is in parts per million. Methane is a much smaller amount in the atmosphere than CO2. Yet, on a molecule to molecule basis, it's a more powerful infrared absorber.
Ah.
So why do I get annoyed when the newspaper just says it's more powerful than CO2? Why is that both true and false?
Because at the molecular level, it's absolutely true. At the larger level of our atmosphere, it's taking up a much smaller slice than CO2, which
Right.
itself is taking up a small amount, right?
Not quite right, Doug.
Not quite right. So I want you to eliminate from your mind what the fact that CO2 is small in percent in terms of total composition of the atmosphere, and think about the greenhouse gases just relative to each other on a molecule basis, and the total mass of each greenhouse gas. So forget that the greenhouse gases are small in total amount to the
Okay.
atmosphere, but just think of them relative to each other. And I was saying CO2 is typically measured in parts per million for
Mm.
convenience. Um, Methane is measured in parts per billion. That's a factor of about 1,000 difference. And we have to look at the exact numbers here to do the ratios, which I'm not going to do. But one molecule of CO2 is a less powerful absorber than one molecule of methane. But there are so many more molecules of CO2 compared to methane that CO2 is a more important greenhouse gas than.
That's what I was trying to
Because
say.
it's more abundant.
Yes, okay. I just
Because
was
it's more
okay.
abundant. That's
Yeah, I got it.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And nitrous oxide, Patty, you brought up nitrous oxide, comes
Yeah,
off of certain kinds of agricultural fields
right.
and some natural ecosystem emissions too. N2O, two atoms of nitrogen, one atom of oxygen. It's got three atoms in the molecule. It is also known as a greenhouse gas, but it's in the mix of it being important.
Right.
It's why people at the Food and Agricultural Organizations of the United Nations, they look at N2O and to make sure, as Patty, as you were alluding to correctly, over fertilization, for example, can give N2O emissions. And should we think about that? Should we regulate that? It's important.
Especially when we're using it for aesthetic purposes, right? I mean, we are also using fertilizers on lawns, and that's a little bit crazy. And
Yeah.
often overused, over applied, and on golf courses and so on.
There's a nitrogen cycle too, right? I mean, like the carbon cycle.
The nitrogen cycle is like the carbon cycle is really fascinating, even more complicated in some ways than the carbon cycle. And I want to point out that these what we're talking about here are part of these. Oh, let me throw one technical term in: the global biogeochemical cycles.
Wow.
I love the term because I've spent a lot of my career studying these cycles, but I think it does have a certain poetic ring to it. And they're global, they involve biology, they involve geology, and they involve chemistry. So they're therefore the biogeochemical cycles. And these elements, these key elements of life that we cannot live without, such as carbon and nitrogen, two of the most important elements of life, the carbon that forms all our protein, the main parts of all our proteins, all our lipids, all our carbohydrates in our bodies, the sugar ladders of the DNA. And then nitrogen, as you know, that's the reason we fertilize fields is to get nitrogen into the proteins of the crops. Mm-hmm. So that nitrogen is one of these crucial elements. Life does not need all the elements of the periodic table. It really needs just a handful of the elements. And these elements travel around the atmosphere and they go into plants either through the atmosphere or in the case of phosphorus and magnesium, they go through the soil up into the plant, and the plants go to the animals and the insects, and the detritus goes down. And other forms of this, like Patty, the nitrous oxide you mentioned goes from the solid fertilizer up into the atmosphere, and then there can be chemical conversions in the atmosphere through sunlight hitting these chemicals and changing them, and then some of them go back into the soil as gases, and they go into the ocean as gases, and then algae process these chemicals and turn them into their bodies, and then turn them into other chemicals that get excreted from the algae, and it's this giant cycle.
Okay, so I have a question. You're talking about all these things that you know and that you have studied, and these are all cycles of different elements and so on. How is global warming affecting all these things that just naturally occur? It must be having some impact.
Well, yes. So the content of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is increasing. We're burning fossil fuels and taking the carbon that was stuck down deep into the bowels of the Earth's surface in the form of coal, oil, natural gas, that were all remnants of past life, millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of years ago in most cases, putting it into the atmosphere, and it's increasing in the atmosphere and it's causing temperature rise. Methane is also increasing. there are leaks from natural gas plants, and methane can also increase from certain kinds of agriculture. So then the CO2 itself can go into the ocean. It does go into the ocean. Well, this is another important point, is that these gases don't just stay in the atmospheres. They move around. These elements move around, and they change their molecular form in all these situations. But the net effect is increase. If it were not for the ocean and not for some of the uptake by land plants and soil, the CO2 would be rising probably about twice as fast as it is, which would be even more of a problem.
Right. But it's doing something to the oceans.
Well, it's acidifying. I mean, it's also acidifying. It's causing ocean acidification. To understand what the greenhouse effect actually is, why certain gases cause the Earth to warm, I think that's one fundamental point. So you have correct visualization in your mind about what's going on. So you can look up at the atmosphere, look up at the air around you, and see that in your mind that the numbers of those carbon dioxide molecules are increasing. Even though they're very small in number, they're getting more numerous. So if you want to imagine them as little, colored, three-ball things in the atmosphere, there are 25% more of them, and that they're catching these photons of Earth's infrared that are the way the Earth cools itself to space, and they're catching it and re-radiating it, sort of bouncing it around, but it serves as insulation, and the Earth has to heat. The Earth will heat up. It is heating up to pump this stuff out. But I think understanding what the greenhouse effect actually is, Patti and Doug, is a kind of a key point. And the second point would be some ability to visualize the carbon cycle, that we as bodies are actually participants in it. We eat food, we exhale. Most of the carbon that leaves us from the food is coming out our exhalation. A small amount goes into our urine and feces, but most is coming out. We do not contribute to the greenhouse effect that's increasing, though, because our CO2 that we breathe out came from food that we ate, whose carbon ultimately came from plants that took it from the atmosphere, and therefore it's steady. We're just putting back into the air what, no matter what we ate, ultimately a plant took it from the atmosphere in the same amount.
So we have a balance, right? Everything's balanced. It's a perfect system.
It's a perfect system. It's in steady state balance. And so we are, to me, this is wonderful to imagine and to visualize correctly, to think about that we are participants in this great carbon cycle. And Patti, as you like to bring up, our agriculture is also a participant in it, because the agriculture is using fossil fuels, which is not a perfect balance, because those are coming from deep in the earth bowels. And so that's new carbon that's being shoved into this global biogeochemical cycle of carbon.
Dr. Tyler Volk, Professor Emeritus of Environmental Studies and Biology at New York University and author of CO2 Rising, a book I recommend that everyone get and read. You can learn more about Dr. Volk and his work at our program website, greenstreetnews.org, where you'll also find links to the news stories we covered on the show today. That's going to do it for this edition of Green Street. Patti and I will be back next week with another edition of the show. Thanks for listening.